Want the reward? Do the damn work. Challenge yourself. Inspire change. Choice, not luck. Hey everybody, Todd Crandall, the original sober triathlete, doing another Amazing Racing for Recovery podcast today, and I am flattered and honored to have Dr. Jeff on. Can I call you Dr. Jeff?
Sure thing, or Jeff, either way.
Okay. I was on your show a couple weeks ago, enjoyed talking to you, so welcome to our podcast. Let's start with this. We had discussed when I was on your show about addiction and genetics and how I believe in the power of choice. I want you to talk about why you became a physician, and then let's get into your thoughts on addiction with respect to what we're doing here.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to meet new people and have a chance to talk to a different audience. I became a physician for a lot of reasons, but basically when I was 6, I had my appendix out. And when I was in the hospital, I'd always been kind of geeky, nerdy kid, really interested in science and things like that. And I had a conversation with one of the nurses who was taking care of me. I wanted to understand what had happened to me and why I was there. And she kind of put pen to paper and explained to me what the appendix was and why it had gotten inflamed and needed to be removed. And that was it. I was hooked. I was really interested in learning more about anatomy and learning more about the human body. And it started a lifelong interest in medical science. And I was very fortunate to actually be able to run the gauntlet of the incredibly difficult path that one has to get through in order to actually get into medical school and then get into the residency of my choice, which was emergency medicine. And yeah, that's what got me from point A to point B.
I'm still stuck on the magnitude of a 6-year-old. I'm a father of 4. I know you're a father of 3, and I'm thinking at 6 years old to have that kind of insight. You know, do you look back at that wonderment, I guess I should say, as a gift? Do you think you were given a gift of that? I kind of always, I think I even see it in my kids. They gravitate towards the things that are interesting to them. I never had any artistic talent, and yet both of my daughters are amazingly gifted with arts. And ever since they were really little, we're just really able to draw and paint. And I just think that, if you're a left brain person, you can do certain things. If you're a right brain person, you can do other things. And I think if you just meet the right people along the way who channel your interests in the right direction, you will find your purpose and what you want to do at an earlier point maybe than otherwise. And I just had the right stimulus and the right people who directed me, and I already had that, I think, predilection, and so it wasn't too hard for the dots to get connected. So I just think it's the right person, the right time, the right place, and it just all kind of worked out. So emergency medicine, talk a little bit about that. What is it? Why was your desire to do that? And let everybody know what you actually do with it.
Sure. My first exposure to emergency medicine was as a teenager watching the program St. Elsewhere, which I'm sure most of your listeners probably have absolutely no idea what that was. But back in the day of not great television, it was one of the few programs on TV that was actually really good TV at the time. Hill Street Blues was another one of those shows that kind of changed the way TV was at the time. This is long before all of the things we have available to us now. And at any rate, Howie Mandel was on that show, and he played a character by the name of Wayne Fiscus, who was a resident in emergency medicine. And he brought with him all of his usual kind of antics, but he also introduced me to this notion of what emergency medicine was and made me very interested in that as a possible career choice as I
was moving forward in a direction of going to medical school. And when I finally got to medical school, I definitely realized very early that emergency medicine was something that really called to me, because I'm the kind of person who likes to be exposed to a lot of different things. I don't love being pigeonholed into one particular thing. I get bored easily. And emergency medicine means that you are a specialist in recognizing acuity. You're a specialist in recognizing who's sick versus who's not sick. And I've always been someone who really thrives under pressure. I can multitask. It's very easy for me to manage multiple sick patients at the same time. And there were a lot of things that I found alluring about emergency medicine. I never know what's coming in on any given day. I don't have a schedule in that I don't have patients who are scheduled. So I can have some days where there are very few patients coming in, and I can have other days where the doors are just bursting because we have so many coming in. And the acuity mix is very different. There are some patients who are medical, some who are surgical. And when I'm done with my shift, I'm done. There's no pager that goes home with me. I don't get called in the middle of the night for patients that I saw. Once I'm finished, I'm finished. And there are a variety of other reasons I really enjoy the specialty. One of which is that it has gotten me to do a lot of other things. I have worked as a physician for the Canadian Alpine Ski Team. I worked as a physician on site for the International Jazz Festival in Montreal. I worked as a cruise ship physician. I have leveraged my ability to have exposure to all kinds of sports medicine to now be a physician for writing material for triathlon publications. So I'm the tri-doc, if you will. So yeah, it's been a specialty that's I've really enjoyed. It's given a lot to me, and I continue to give back in as many ways as I can.
Well, we're going to be talking a lot about Ironman shortly. And one of the things when you were talking about finishing your day and not having anything to take home, I'm like, oh, right away, this is where the training could come in without any interruptions, right? Which is a bonus.
Yep.
With respect to your craft, if you will, as a physician, how much of addiction emergencies do you see?
Well, so I have just recently left clinical practice. I am transitioning into a non-clinical role, but for 20 years, I have worked at the Level 1 Trauma Center, a county hospital here in Denver, Colorado, and we care for a large number of indigent, a large number of underserved, a very big population of patients who deal with a lot of the typical problems that you would expect to see in that kind of hospital. So it's a lot of unhoused people, a lot of people with mental health, and a very large number who are suffering from substance use disorders. And that can be in the form of alcohol, it can be in the form of various different addictive substances like methamphetamine is unfortunately very, very common, heroin, fentanyl, the usual suspects.
Well, and this is, as you know, with Racing for Recovery, I had my own addiction, and now this is what I do as a quote, well, it's not a job, it's a life's purpose for me, a lot of similar mindsets that you have with what you're doing. And the reason I want to talk a little bit more about this is when we were talking about genetics and the power of choice and all that, what are you seeing when somebody comes in? I know it's an emergency situation on the most point, but have you ever had a chance to talk to people and really listen to their mindset behind it? And why I'm asking this is it gets back to choice. Are they thinking they are hopeless and powerless and they are doomed because of genetics that they can't overcome this? Or sometimes do you see that spark of interest of I know I can get better, I'm just not quite sure how that goes?
Yeah, that's a great question. We see patients for various reasons. So we'll see the patients who are in acute crisis, but honestly, that's the minority. A lot of the patients we see have complications from their substance use disorder. So patients who are injecting get infections. They have issues related to needles. They have all kinds of problems related to just or overdosing, things like that. Patients with alcohol use disorder will frequently present because they are either overly intoxicated and they get picked up and they can't be left on the street, or alternatively because they're withdrawing. I would say that in all of those cases, those patients don't come in necessarily looking for an answer, looking for a solution. Those patients are kind of mired in whatever it is that they're in for whatever reason they're in it. But those patients who are in crisis, those patients who come in looking for help, they have reached a fork in the road for whatever reason. They often don't tell us why. Usually it's just a matter of, I'm tired of this, I need to make a change. And fortunately, when it comes to opioid use disorder, so patients who are on heroin or fentanyl or methadone or whatever it is, we do have the ability to help and intervene in some way with a certain degree of success. With alcohol, there are programs for alcohol use disorder, but it is difficult. There is just not a lot of resources put into that. There is in the county of Denver, there is a place that we can send those patients to at least get them started on the road to sobriety, but so much of it requires the patient to be invested. And we just know that the changes in the physiology, the changes in the brain that want you to continue with your addiction are so powerful that even though the patient has finally come to this point that they want to make the choice that they want to make that change, they often are not successful because it's so difficult to overcome what has happened physiologically.
How much do you think that trauma plays a role in people initially getting involved in the self-destruction of drugs and alcohol?
Yeah, it's not really my area of expertise, but I definitely know just from what I do know that it certainly plays a huge role. A lot of the patients we see, when we do get to talk to them, will tell you of why they initially started. It's very rare that it's a happy person who came from a well-adjusted life who somehow ended up falling into one drug and then the next drug and everything else, as so many people on the right would have you believe that, they picked up one edible and that led them to a lifetime of substance use. That rarely is the case. Usually the initial beginning of drinking or using some kind of drug is done to, as you're pointing out, I think, to escape whatever it is that in their life they just don't have the capacity or the resources to be able to handle. And so they're looking for an easy way out temporarily anyways, and using some kinds of substances gives them that escape. And unfortunately, those substances inevitably end up changing their physiology so that they continue to need those substances.
Well, now let's turn this into something that you and I are both well aware of, the IRONMAN and triathlon in general and exercise.
Another type of addiction.
Right. Yeah, and that's what led to us talking about drug addiction is that term addiction in triathlon, is it applicable or is it a new focus? Can it get out of control? I mean, you brought that up. Do you think that some people can become addicted to triathlon?
I mean, we jokingly refer to it as an addiction.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the technical definition of addiction requires certain criteria, right? There has to be a tolerance, there has to be withdrawal, there has to be, I think there's another, dependence. So you have to have those three things. Mm-hmm. And, exercise doesn't come with those three things. But there's no question, if you do train and you do race for triathlon at the level, certainly even at beginner type levels, you get a lot of the same kinds of psychological and even physiological responses that you see with substance use. You get an endorphin surge from exercise, which endogenous endorphins are essentially endogenous or your own biological internal opioids. So you're kind of getting a stimulus similar to what you would do is if you took a hit from fentanyl or something, but just not at that level. I mean, at a very microscopic amount, but at a beneficial, physiologic beneficial. That's why people talk about a runner's high. It's because when you start pushing yourself to those kinds of extremes with exercise, you actually create these chemicals in your brain that actually make you feel that kind of high. So there are parallels, but it's not truly an addiction. And I'll give you a great example. I competed at the Half Ironman World Championships in December, and that completed for me a very long season. I had been training essentially from January 1st and almost without break every week for 14 to 16, sometimes 18 hours a week of training on top of my job, on top of all my other responsibilities. And when I hit my final race, which was mid-December in New Zealand, and I completed that race, I came home and I told my coach, I'm exhausted, I need a break. And I have now gone longer than I can remember, but it's been about 3 weeks now without structured training. I've really only trained every second or third day I've done something. I didn't go through withdrawal. I wasn't lying awake, unable to sleep, curled up in a ball, sweating and shivering and all that. I didn't have physical symptoms of withdrawal. Now we're sitting here today talking in early January, and I definitely am feeling a little twitchy, but that twitchiness is not physical. It's just internal, because I know myself that I need to get back to training because I don't want to lose too much fitness, because I'm a very motivated person. I'm a very competitive person, and I'm ready to get going again. But I needed that break. And that break was healthy for me. That break was necessary for me to heal up any kind of, overuse stuff, and just to get my mental acuity back and ready to go for the next season. And again, the parallel of addiction is there in that I need to train because it's a big part of who I am. I get a lot out of it, but at the same time, I don't have, like, if I miss a couple of days because I'm ill or because of something else, I'll feel a little bit guilty. I'll feel a little bit bad, but I'm not going to go through the same kinds of symptoms. I'm not going to have the same kind of physiological problems that people with true substance use addictions will have. So we joke about it. We talk about it as an addiction. And the other thing about it that makes it, I mean, it's humorous for us, but it's not humorous when you talk about addiction, is that the expenditures that we will lay out for triathlon can be very, very high. And that is part of the joke as well, because it's an expensive habit to be a triathlete, or at least it can be. It doesn't have to be, but it often becomes that because we just love to have all the toys.
I love talking to you, Jeff, and I know you ride truck as well as I do, and I'm making a note to talk to you about that in a second when you're talking about the gear. I love your comment about that, the whole addiction with triathlon and so forth. I hear you talking about self-care right there, and I was supposed to be in New Zealand with you, and I was burned out. I needed a break, and I call that self-care, when you can realize yourself, hey, this is too much. I need to take a breather. And that's what I did. I can look back and hearing you talk about being over there, and I'm like, yeah, I wish I would have done that. Well, no, I really wanted to stay home and rest. And that's a part of what we try and help people with at Racing for Recovery, is you can be fully into whatever you're doing in sobriety, but self-care and learning what you really truly need at the right time is essential in wellness. Why don't you talk about triathlon? How did you get into it? Why did you get into it?
I want to just touch on what you said about self-care, because I'm sure you encountered this as well. I coach triathletes, and so I have, right now I'm coaching, I think, 14 different triathletes, and one of the hardest things for most triathletes, including myself from time to time, is to accept that they need to take a rest. And it's because of this... It's not really the addiction, but it's more of this feeling of, if I stop, I'm going to lose fitness. I'm not going to be as good as all those other people who are out there training. We put all these internal pressures on ourselves. And as I tell my athletes all the time, it's like, if you're not able to train at 100%, if you're injured in some way, if you're sick in some way, giving yourself a couple of days to rest, to actually get yourself better so that you can come back and be able to train at 100%, those couple of days are going to benefit you far more than if you push yourself to do something that you're not able to perform at 100%, you're not going to get as much out of it, and you're going to delay the healing that you really need, so that instead of just having 2 days off, you're going to have, say, 7 to 10 days of underperforming in your training. But people have so much trouble making this kind of calculation because all they see is 2 days off. I can't imagine being 2 days completely off. And the parallels are there for not training, but just in life in general. It's like this idea of I have to take care of myself in a way, but we are constantly pushing ourselves to do the maximum. And anything less than that sometimes feels like we are somehow cheating, and we need to stop that. We need to allow ourselves the grace to be able to take care of ourselves so that we can do and we can give to those around us at our full amount, and we can only do that if we take care of ourselves.
Well said. I hope our listeners are gonna truly hear what you just said right there. But tell everybody how you got into triathlon. Where did it all begin for you?
So I grew up in Montreal in Canada. So like every good Canadian boy, I played hockey from the time that I was able to walk. I learned how to skate, and I played hockey most of my life. And when I finished my medical training, back in 1999, I was very much overweight, very much out of shape, and facing a life that could end early because I have a family history that is rife with cardiac disease. And being a physician, I knew better than to let myself go like that. But medical training was incredibly difficult, and finding time to exercise and being able to eat well was just not something that was particularly easy. And so I found myself at 210 pounds at the age of 33, just being not in a good place. And so I like to refer to it as my Andy Dufresne moment. If you're familiar with the Shawshank Redemption, Andy Dufresne says to Red famously, "Get busy living or get busy dying." And that's where I found myself. And so I decided one afternoon, when I realized I was coming to the end of my training, and as an attending physician, I was going to have a lot more free time, that this was my moment. I had to make a change. And so I did. As so many type A people will do, they don't do things half-assed. They do things 100%. And so I bought a book that kind of gave me an idea of how to change the way I ate, to change the way I viewed exercise, and I embarked upon this whole new program. I ate very differently. I started incorporating exercise on a daily basis. And over the course of several months, I actually started to lose a lot of weight. And I ended up going to a dinner for the new job that I was working at. And I sat down next to this woman who turned to me and said, "I've noticed that you've been losing weight and you're looking much better. And what have you been doing?" And I told her, I said, "Well, I've been doing mostly weightlifting. I've been eating differently, and I've been doing a little bit of running and biking." And she said, "Oh, you need to do a triathlon." And I laughed, because to me, the only triathlon I was familiar with was that IRONMAN in Hawaii that I saw every year on TV. I had no experience or understanding of triathlon other than that. And I also did not know how to swim. And over the course of dinner, she convinced me, or she educated me really, on what triathlon was, that no, Hawaii is just one race. There are actually all kinds of distances, and there are events all over the place. And oh, by the way, my husband owns a company that makes bikes. We can help you get a bike. You can learn how to swim. And she really got me interested in this whole idea. And I went home, and my wife, who had not been at the dinner and had not been party to this conversation, was sitting there. And I told her, I said, I'm thinking about doing a triathlon. And she laughed. And now, she had not heard the whole build up to this. She just heard this crazy notion that I was going to do a triathlon, and probably like me, only knew about Hawaii. And well, that was it. The gauntlet was thrown. And so I decided at that moment that I was going to do a triathlon. And so I went out and hired somebody to teach me how to swim. And a year later, I did my first triathlon, and that was it. I was hooked, and here I am more than 2 decades later. And I did eventually actually qualify for Kona. And when I went to the race the first time, the very first person I called to tell about my qualification was that woman I had sat next to at that dinner.
Beautiful. I love it. Before we carry on with triathlon, let's talk about something just as important, hockey, right? You grew up in Montreal. Do you have a highlight of a game that you saw at the old Montreal Forum that you can share with our listeners?
The very first game I attended, I think I was so young. I don't even remember how old I was. I have no memory of the outcome of the game. I have no memory of who was playing. I just know that my favorite player was Yvan Cournoyer, who was the captain of the team at that time. And I remember Cournoyer on a breakaway scoring a goal. And the Forum was an electric place, and the Bell Center, or whatever it's called now, it's probably not called that. I don't even know what it's called anymore, but whatever the arena was that replaced the Forum, sure, it's new, it's big, it's a pretty place, but the Forum was the Forum. And I mean, like, I love the Boston Red Sox. I go watch them play in Fenway, and they found a way to improve Fenway without changing it, without it losing its character. I wish they could have found a way to keep the Forum, but make it maybe a little more modern, but keep that, because man, going to that place I saw the Stanley Cup finals there. I saw Calgary actually beat Montreal in the Stanley Cup finals in 1989, I believe. And so I have some very fond memories of going to see hockey games in the Montreal Forum.
Beautiful. I just, my kids and I were over in Chicago at Wrigley for the Winter Classic, and it was awesome. I got my first pair of goalie skates at the old Boston Garden. I saw Bon Jovi at the old Forum. And when I was in there, I remember thinking, God, I wish I would have seen a game back in the day. So thanks for sharing some of those fond memories. I envy you for being able to catch a couple games there. So you get into triathlon in '99. That's the same year that I did as well. What have you achieved in triathlon, and talk about some of the other things you're doing in the sport and outside of the sport?
So my first triathlon was 2001. I learned about triathlon in 90. I started, let me back it all up. But yeah, sorry. I learned about triathlon in 2000. I started, my first race was 2001. And I finished that first race, and I hated every second of it. Wanted to know how I could sell everything and save face after like making a big deal about getting into this. But very quickly realized all the things I had done wrong. And very quickly wanted to do another one. And sure enough, my second one applied all of the things that I had learned. And I remember the first time I swam 1,500 meters in the pool, I was so excited because that meant I was going to be able to do my Olympic distance, which was my goal that first summer, and then completing that Olympic distance and then deciding, well, a half Ironman, the difference in the swim is only 400 meters. I could probably do that. And so then I thought, well, the only thing is I've never run that far. So I decided to sign up for a half marathon. And I told myself, if I could run an open half marathon in under 1:45, I'm going to sign up for a half Ironman. And so I ran a half marathon, and I did it in 1:43. And so that's it. I signed up for a half Ironman. And I remember finishing that half Ironman, and I said, oh my gosh, who would ever want to do double that distance? This was awful. It was so hard. And then a friend of mine was diagnosed with lymphoma. And I told her, I'm going to do an Ironman, and I'm going to do it with Team in Training. And next thing you know, I'm signed up for Ironman Canada. So like so many triathletes, it's just one thing sort of falls into another, and you end up doing all kinds of crazy things. And after I did Ironman Canada, I had not the best day. And so I ended up signing up almost immediately to do Ironman Coeur d'Alene, and Coeur d'Alene went much better. And then I thought I was done. I thought, that's it, not going to do another one. We had kids at that point. And at that point, I had connected with some people who were in the triathlon magazine kind of world, and I was contributing medical content for that. And while my kids were young, it was really hard to train and really hard to race, and until my kids were much older. And then eventually I did find my way back to doing Ironman racing. And by 2018, my kids were older. I was able to dedicate proper training to it. And I actually started to realize that I was kind of good at this. And in 2018, I got on my first podium for a 70.3, and then my first podium for an Ironman where I qualified for Kona and did Kona in 2018. got back to Kona in 2022, have been to 8 different 70.3 World Championships, and it's just been a fabulous journey. Triathlon very much is a big part of my life. It's changed my life in so many ways. I think I do it a lot of the reason I do it is for my kids, both to be around for longer, but also to motivate them, to show them that when things are hard, you just do what needs to be done to be able to get through it. And my kids have definitely taken from my example, and I hear it from them. I see it in them all the time, and that brings me great pride. And I started coaching a few years ago, and being a triathlon coach, being able to share what I have learned and share my experience has been one of the great joys. And I think I get more joy from coaching than almost anything else.
I love listening to you. I think if we put anybody on a podcast like this and you ask them the questions we're talking about, it's kind of the same story with some little tweaks and some differences in there, but it's that common bond that, hey, this feels good. It shows me how to overcome challenges. I can apply it to my everyday life. That's what triathlon is really about. The one difference you and I have is you are a lot, and I don't like using this word, but you are better time-wise than I ever have been. And it's making me ask you this question. Do you think that everybody that does triathlon has the ability to be on the podium?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So for many years, I did not think I was good enough to make it. I'll back it up a little bit. I'm sorry, my answers are so long-winded. I hope that's okay. But
it's okay, Jeff. Go
when I came into the sport, I was back of the pack. And that frustrated me because I'm a very competitive person. And eventually, as I got a little bit better, I made it sort of into the middle of the pack. And that's where I stayed for a very long time. Again, frustrated, but I really didn't have the time to train as much as I needed to. And once my kids were older and I started being able to find that balance where I could train a little bit more, I started to slowly creep forward within my age group until eventually I was pretty routinely in the top 10. And the gap between where I was and the top 5, and in Ironman races, the top 5 is considered the podium. So the gap between where I was and the top 5 just seemed insurmountable. There often is a big drop between 5th and even 6th and 7th. There can be a very big time gap. And I just felt like there's no way I'm never going to get there. And I changed coaches in 2017. I had been with the same coach for a very long time, and I thought that maybe I needed a different coach. And I changed coaches, and I loved my first coach. He helped me so much and really got me to where I was, but I felt like I kind of needed a different sort of approach. And I moved on to a different coach, and that really did, I think, tip things for me because he pushed me harder than my previous coach had, who I think had kind of gotten to a point where he also felt like, well, this is who Jeff is. And then I had this new coach who saw me more as potential as opposed to potential reached. And so with this new coach, he pushed me very hard and said that he thought Kona was a possibility, which I had always thought not a chance. I mean, that's not, unless I get a lottery pick or something, there's no way I'm going to Kona. But he really thought it was a possibility. And once he started saying things like that, it started percolating in my mind, and I started thinking, well, why not? I guess I can try and see what happens. And then I started working with Life Sport as a coach myself, and the owner of Life Sport, Lance Watson, who himself is Lance is now my coach, but Lance is like a Ironman master coach. He's in the Triathlon Hall of Fame. I mean, he coached Simon Whitfield to a gold medal. He once said to me very early on, he said, Jeff, you're an amazing athlete. You're doing things that a lot of people can't do. And it took me a very long time to accept that. All of this to say that I finally started getting on a podium, and I eventually started making the podium where I almost get on the podium in every single race. I've been top three multiple. I've won my age group multiple times, and now it's like if I don't make top five, it's quite surprising because I'm pretty routinely up there. Now, a lot of that is due to consistency in training. I train very consistently all year long, year to year. A lot of it is due to my quality of training. I am very dedicated to making sure that every training session is maxed out and really, really done well. And anybody can do that. Anybody can train consistently. Anybody can train at high quality. But what I have found as being a coach myself is I have coached athletes who I see doing what I do, who put in really good, consistent training, who put in great volumes, who put in great quality, but they're not getting to the podium. And so I am kind of left wondering, to answer your question, I think that everybody has some potential, but there's no question, I think, at the end of the day, there is going to be, first of all, there is a genetic issue, right? There's going to be people who just have fast genes. Some people are going to have slower genes. And there's going to be people who just have a mental mindset. There's all these things that go into it. And so can anybody get to the podium? Part of it is who shows up, right? Sometimes I get lucky. Some people don't show up, and I'm going to get there. Other days I'm not lucky. It's a hard question to answer. So I used to think that that there was definitely some people cut out for the podium. Then I started getting on the podium. I used to say, well, I guess anybody could do it. And now I find myself thinking, maybe it's a little bit of both. Maybe I just am one of those people who can get to the podium and not everybody can. And I don't want, that sounds awful. I don't want it to sound immodest, because I think that I work incredibly hard. I don't think I have anything magical. I think that, for me, getting to where I got is 90% work and really 10% of who I am. So I think that most people can probably, through consistency and hard work, make themselves a lot better. But whether or not they're going to get to that top five, I don't know. That was a really long answer that didn't give you the answer. I'm sorry.
It did. And we talk a lot about that at Racing for Recovery. When people come in and they see, I don't like using the word success, but they see people living a life that they haven't lived yet, with, being sober, with having a job, with being spiritually fit and intellectually improving and all that. It takes work, and it takes consistent work. It's not, I've been sober for 90 days, I should have what. That's not how it works. And I relate that to triathlon, and I'm going to go back to hockey for a second. I loved hockey. I don't want to say I was good at it, but it was my thing. I'll say it that way. And I thought coming into triathlon, I was okay over here, so that should automatically transfer into Ironman. And I found out right away it didn't. And when I hear you saying about being discouraged or whatever, I just accepted, hey, I've done quite a few of these things, but being on the podium, that's never going to happen. But talking to you, I'm like, well, God, if Jeff sounds like me. If he's doing that, I certainly can do it. But more importantly, I wanted to hear a message that can be given to anybody else, because most people don't even think they can do a triathlon.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I do want to say, Todd, that, the nice thing about triathlon, the thing about hockey is it's a team sport, so you really, really are reliant on other people. And there's a scoreboard, right? So it's very cut and dry. You either won, you lost, you tied, but there's no in between. The nice thing about triathlon is, yeah, sure, you're getting ranked in terms of your age group and everything else. But the really nice thing about triathlon is you are always out there competing against yourself. And I can always find positives and negatives in every single race that I do, no matter where I finished. Even if I won my age group, I will look back at my race and find ways that I can improve for next time. Even if I finished, like at World Championships, I finished 53rd in my age group out of 285, which, not too bad, but not as good as I hoped. But I was able to find so many positives from that day. And I am so careful that, I love racing. I love triathlon so much. I am never going to come home from a race discouraged. I am always going to come home from a race looking for 2 or 3 things that I can be really happy about, and maybe 2 or 3 things that I can improve on for next time. Because as much as I'm competing against everybody else out there, I'm competing against myself, and I want to make myself better, and I want to do better than I did last time. And that's the nice thing about triathlon. And honestly, it's the nice thing about what you're working with your clients. Sure, they can look at the person who's 180 days sober and they're only 90 days, and they could compare themselves against them and say, I'm going to get to that 180 days. But you know what? You can compete against yourself and say, first, I'm going to get to 91, and then I'm going to get to 92. And eventually I'll find myself at that 180, and all the other guys behind me are going to be looking at me. So you can compete against yourself while you're competing against others, and you can use both of those for motivation.
Well said. So let's go back to genetics for a moment. We talked about it in addiction, both on your show, and we've done a little bit here. You had mentioned it with respect to IRONMAN. Can you, and you are the expert in this, can those genetics be modified? So can you take somebody who maybe doesn't have fast twitch muscles genetically, but can they change over the course of training consistently? Can they change their genetics to improve with triathlon physically?
We just reviewed this on my podcast, the TriDoc podcast. We just talked about this. We talked about the genetic predilection for some athletes to be more type 2, which is the slow twitch fibers, more for endurance, and more type 1, which is the fast twitch. No, I keep getting these wrong. I may be having them inverted. I can never remember which is which, but one of them is fast twitch, which is sprinting, and one of them is slow twitch, which is endurance. And some athletes have a genetic predisposition to have one more than the other. And it turns out that if you have more type 2, or I'm not going to say the types, but if you have more slow twitch fibers, you are going to be better at endurance sport than you will at sprinting type sports. And kids figure this out very quickly. They just know. Like my son is an amazing cross-country runner. He's clearly more slow twitch fibers. He does terrible on the track. When he goes to try and do 100, he gets blown away, but he will outrun all those same kids in the 3,200, the 800, whatever. And so he has just, he's just figured out he's better at the endurance sport than are these other people who are better than him on the sprint things. And kids figure this out early. You can't change that. If you are a fast twitch person, you can still do endurance sport, and you can train up your endurance fibers to be better, but you're never going to do as well as somebody who is predominantly a slow twitch person. But the reality is that most of those fast twitch people aren't going to find themselves doing marathons because they don't like it. They know they don't do as well. They do much better in those high intensity sprint type sports, and so they gravitate towards those kinds of sports. So it's complicated in that, like, look, I am clearly an endurance type person, but I will occasionally do a 5K, and I actually do okay at it. And bless you. And I do okay at it. And the reason I do okay at it is because I've been able to train my sprint fibers adequately so that I can actually hold on and do okay at it. So you can make use of what you have and train what you have to do okay, but you're never going to do as well as the person who is genetically predisposed to do better.
I love talking to you.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, I do.
Because I could talk a lot.
I think you need to coach me on some of this stuff. What's next for you in 2025? What's your race schedule like this year?
Well, I have, right now I have 3 races on the books, but nothing until July, and that might change. I am doing 70.3 races in Oregon, and then at Tri-Cities in Washington State, and then I have already qualified for the World Championships in Marbella, Spain. So I'm very excited about all 3 of those races. I am taking a very lovely vacation with my wife for our 25th wedding anniversary in April. That's taking us to Indonesia for a couple of weeks. So because of that, I've been a little hesitant to sign up for anything earlier because I'm worried about how that's going to interfere with training. But my coach and I are discussing Depending on how my training goes early in the year, I may sign up for Boulder, which is my home race that takes place in June. And so that might be a race that's added a little bit later in the spring. So we'll see.
Right away, I'm thinking maybe I'm doing too much again. I'm already signed up for 12 half Ironman races. And when I hear you say
12 in 25?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of racing.
Yeah, and it's, Mark Allen said the same thing to me when he was coaching me a couple of years ago, and he asked me what my schedule was, so I sent it to him, and he thought it was a wish list and not an actual race list. But again, these are some of the things that with that type of volume, I don't know if I even could get quicker, but I'm doing these things for different reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I had an athlete that I coached for a while, and she raced almost every weekend. And but the problem is that she came to me and told me that her goal was to qualify for Kona. And I said, look, I have no problem with you racing as much as you're racing, but if your goal is to qualify for Kona, you cannot race all the time. If your goal is just to enjoy your racing and to do, to just go out there and have fun and be social and whatever it is you're getting from your races, go for it. I have no problems. But these things, what you're telling me, qualify for Kona and race every weekend, that is not compatible. Now, if you, Todd, are doing 12 races and your goals are not to necessarily improve, but rather just to enjoy yourself and be out there and meet all kinds of people, then that's great. But I will tell you this. If you felt burnt out this year to the point that you didn't go to New Zealand, 12 races is a lot.
Well said. I heard you.
And I am available for coaching, so,
I may, we're going to be talking about that off the air. But so talk about TriDoc and everything you're doing with your services in this sport.
Yeah, so what happened was back in 2018, which was the year I qualified for Kona, I realized that I'd been involved in the sport for as long as I had, 18 years at that point, and I was thinking to myself, this sport has given me so much, and I'm writing for all these publications and doing medical things, and I really want to give back to the sport. And I had worked as a medical director at different Ironman type of events, and I just wanted to do more and share my knowledge. And one of the things that I saw was all of these athletes were writing to me based on the things that I was writing in the literature. They were writing to me and asking me questions about this supplement and this device and should they be using these things. And I could see how the advertising budgets of all of these companies was very, very big. And it was all geared on separating athletes from their hard-earned cash dollars, because they would convince athletes that, using their product would make them better at either training, racing, or recovery. And the reality was, all you had to do was just dig into the science just a little bit to find out that, probably not the case. So I decided at that point to start a podcast, and I started doing the TriDoc podcast. That's TRIDOC, not to be confused with another similar sounding podcast. And we've been doing that since 2018. We do a segment called the Medical Mailbag, where listeners send in a question related to, hey, will this device make me better, or will this supplement make me better? And we review the science, and we come back and we say, hey, look, they're claiming this, but the literature shows this. And we think that maybe you should pass on this. Or alternatively, there have been times when we've said, you know what, this actually works. We think you should give it a try. And then we have another segment where we'll interview someone like Todd, who's graciously been a guest on the show on an episode that's coming out this week. And I've been doing that since 2018. And at the same time, I got myself certified as a triathlon coach. I'm also certified as a USA cycling coach. And so I started working with life sport coaching, and I have numerous athletes, some of whom are cyclists, most of whom are triathletes. I have one runner, and they are all working with me to define and attain their goals.
How can people get a hold of you?
The best way is through my website, which is tridoccoaching.com, all one word, TRIDOCCOACHING.com. You can also find me on Instagram, also Tridoc Coaching, one word, and I'm on Facebook as you could look for Tridoc Coaching. It's 2 words there. And then I have a YouTube channel. I have a podcast, of course, which can be found on all the usual podcast platforms.
I've enjoyed talking to you again, and when we're done with this, I know we're going to be talking further about some stuff outside of a podcast. But it's been a pleasure having you on.
Well, thanks so much. I really enjoyed the conversation, Todd, and I look forward to more conversations in the future.
Yeah. Until next time, everybody, check out not only this episode, but all the Racing for Recovery episodes. Tridoc, check all Jeff's stuff out. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you soon.